So welcome everyone. Happy Mother's Day. I'm very happy and feel lucky to be here, and I appreciate the help from Roz Dong, MA, and Judy Nakatomi for their help on the Naijin, preparing the candles and the incense and ringing the concho and helping me chant the Nembutsu Wasans. So today is Mother's Day, and I read recently that the founder of Mother's Day really wanted the apostrophe to go before the S, not after the S. So, you know, I'm a math person and I miss grammatical nuances, but it's not really a day to glorify motherhood or women who are mothers. The apostrophe is supposed to go right after the mother. So it's singular. It's a singular possessive. And she did this for the very important reason that I felt a little uncomfortable at Mother's Day services because I felt like we were separating women into one group from men, and then we were separating those women into those that are mothers and those that aren't. And it felt not inclusive to me, and I was a little uncomfortable with it. But I found out that, I think her name's Anna Jarvis, she wanted it to be not to valorize motherhood, but for each individual to honor the most important person in their life, their mother. So in that way, everybody celebrates Mother's Day, right? Everybody can honor their mother. So now it's a universal, it's independent of gender, and it's something we can all stop for a minute and really focus on that one person, that one woman that helped us throughout our life. So I thought today, the title of my talk is the Buddha's Mother's Day. I wanted to talk about that. We're going to go over Hanamatsuri a little bit, but Mahapajapati is considered the mother of Buddhism, and she's also considered the stepmother of Shakyamuni Buddha, Prince Siddhartha. So she has three hats. She was the Buddha's stepmother. She begins the female Sangha of nuns, and she also realizes ultimate awakening before death. And so this puts her, you know, in the pantheon of disciples, she's right up there in the top 2 or 3. She's on the Mount Rushmore of Buddhist disciples in the early Sangha. And so I also was able to hear a seminar by a scholar that I really like named Jan Nadier. And I think she's from the University of Indiana or Indiana University. I think maybe it's Indiana University, because on Everyday Buddhist, I said the University of Indiana, and one of our students sent me a comment real quick and said, that's not right. That's not the name of our school. Don't ever do that again. So Indiana University, she taught Buddhism and religion, and then she retired. She's a scholar emeritus, and she's located at UC Berkeley now. So I wanted to talk about her a bit. What happens with Mahapajapati, so there's 2 ways of saying it. You could say it the Japanese way using katakana. So it's Mahapajapati. Mahapajapati. But in India, they call her Mahapajapati. And I've gotten in a bad habit of saying Pajapati. And when I heard her talk and she kept mentioning Pajapati, I was like, who in the world is that? I've never heard of Pajapati. But it's Pajapati in our world, Pajapati. But in the Indian world, it's Pajapati. So I kind of wanted to go over this with you today. We're going to have a little bit of a background, and then we'll have a little bit of a adult discussion when that rolls around. So last time I was here for Hanamatsuri, I introduced you to Prince Siddhartha, the one who becomes Buddha. His father was King Suddhodana. His mother was Queen Maya, and there's Mahapajapati or Pajapati, the aunt, the sister of Queen Maya. And I'm not going to make my Freddie Mercury joke. It's worn out. So I'll leave it to you. So we talked about this last time I was here. Queen Maya and King Suddhodana were having difficulty conceiving a child, and the king really wanted an heir to the throne, right? like King Henry VIII. He really needed a male heir. And in Indian culture, the symbol of a white elephant kind of signals to the audience that good fortune is going to happen. And I mentioned before, when I watch movies and I hear thunder and lightning in the background, I always know something bad's going to happen. That's a signal, right, to the audience. It's a narrative element. So this isn't taken literally by an audience 2,500 years ago. It's just like, oh, she must be pregnant now, right? That's what it means. That when the elephant appears, the baby is conceived. And then we talked about how Queen Maya was traveling to her parents' home to deliver her child. And on the way, she wasn't feeling well. And it turned out that she was in labor. And I don't know if I told you this story about my wife, Linda, but with our second child, we had Taco Bell that night. And she thought she felt funny and that maybe she had one too many tacos or too much hot sauce. And we said, I think you're in labor. She goes, no, it was the Taco Bell. I'm like, I think you better get in the car. So this is what happens to Queen Maya. But in the United States, we tend to give birth lying down, prone. In India, this is a standard way. You can also give birth, leaning over, like in Call the Midwife. They're always leaning over a bed. But she gives birth standing up, and it's kind of like gravity helps. So her midwives are there. Her attendants are in the back and bodyguards. And in Lumbini Garden, under this tree, she gives birth to the future Buddha. But right now, he's a prince. And, we talked about how he took 7 steps, one more than the 6 realms of suffering. So this story foreshadows, it's not literally true. It's a foreshadowing story. It's basically telling you the arc, the narrative arc of the Buddha's life through this birth story. And the other thing I didn't mention, I don't think last time I was here, is the Buddha was born out of her ribs. So some Christians early in India, British missionaries, Christians in India at the time, when they read that, they took it literally. And they thought that was the most horrid thing they'd ever heard. This baby came out her side. But that's another signal that he was born as a warrior. So, if you're born from the forehead, you're going to be a priest. If you're born from the side, you're going to be a warrior. The waist signals a merchant. The top of your feet, a laborer. And the bottom of your feet is untouchable. So again, not literal, metaphoric, but when you're dealing with an Indian audience, they would know this. And I told you once before, I had a girlfriend that was so good at this, that when I watched mystery shows or detective shows, and I've seen this a lot now, the first person they come upon at the crime scene, or the first witness, is always the guy who did it. And they meet the guy, and then he goes away, and they go round and around and around in circles, and at the end of the show, it's the first guy. That's just how our stories are constructed. So this is kind of a really quick biography of the Buddha. He was born on April 8th, Hanamatsuri, in Lumbini Garden, under a tree. And 7 days later, April 15th, Queen Maya dies of complications from childbirth. And this is another whole different Dharma talk, but I would think Prince Siddhartha, knowing that his mother died giving him birth, would be a lot of grief, a lot of self-reflection, self-awareness. I think that event probably sent his life trajectory away from being a royal prince and more towards a life of spiritual awakening. I mean, that's a huge thing to deal with. And it's not really talked about that much, but I think that must have been a guilt, victimization, a lot of deep sorrow. So I think that really set him up. But Mahapajapati became his foster mother as his aunt and raised him as if he was her own child. I think she had 2 other sons, and they were all together, and she raised them together. And then the Buddha leaves home at 29, and at 35, he realizes enlightenment under the Bodhi tree. There's a lot of trees and rivers in Buddhist stories. And he develops a large Sangha around him. And then a lot of family members come into the Sangha. His son Rahula gets ordained. This is Ananda, his cousin, becomes his attendant. And I mentioned that from 35 to 55, the Buddha fired a lot of attendants. I find it funny. He was firing people left and right. They just weren't very good. But at 55, he hires kind of Ananda, his cousin, and for the next 25 years till he's 80, Ananda is his sidekick, his confidant, his assistant. And I think I would like to have one of these. The Dalai Lama has a couple of these. Reverend Wonder and I are very busy. I would love to have an assistant. I could use one of these. And I promise I won't fire them. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what it was like for women in India. One religious scholar said that you can't understand Jesus unless you understand him as a political figure, because he was living in a land with an occupying force from Rome. So his life is inherently political. The Buddha's wasn't. So the Buddha didn't really try to overthrow the status quo. You could argue maybe he could have or should have, but what he did is he offered alternatives. He would always offer alternatives, other paths, and especially for women. There wasn't a lot of alternatives for women, and there also wasn't a lot of alternatives for men, because when you're born into a caste, that's your caste. Like I could say, oh, I'm going to be a computer programmer, and at 50 I could say, oh, I think I'm going to be a Buddhist minister now. But you couldn't really do that 2,500 years ago in India, right? You were born into the coding class and you're going to code and that's it. And you don't think about, changing careers, midlife. That's just not something you would think about doing. So one of the things is called the three obediences. And I still think this, may be something that's practiced in India. Hopefully, it's not as prevalent as it used to be, but it says that females should always obey and seek protection from male family members. As a girl, her father; as a young woman, her husband; and as a widow, her eldest son. So there is an inherent problem with this. During the Buddhist time, there was a lot of fighting and wars, and there were a lot of widows. And if you don't have, your father's not alive, and you don't have a son, and your husband just died, you're kind of in a big mess, right? There's nowhere for you to turn. So you could maybe join the Buddhist Sangha. That was a huge opportunity for women. That was something brand new. And then I want to show you the different castes. There's the Brahmin class, religious warriors that the Prince Siddhartha was born into. Then there were the merchants. Then there were the laborers, and then this is my poor, untouchable person. So what's kind of interesting about this is the merchants were actually least liked, which is kind of odd, because they were seen as not really producing anything, right? They're kind of the way we think of lawyers and marketing people and advertising. They're not really creating capital. They're not really making things. So I thought that was kind of interesting. The other thing I didn't notice about this chart is there's no women. I assumed that there were women in each one of these castes, but there's not. Women do not rank. They're below, they don't make the list, even considering untouchables. So my wife was reading a book on yoga, and I came across this and I thought it was really quite stunning. It said, common belief was that liberation was possible only in a male body. It is written that it was better to have been born a man than a woman. Tradition held that a woman needed to be reborn in a future lifetime as a lower caste man, and after multiple rebirths, be born as a Brahmin male, and then, and only then, could she be initiated into spiritual practice. Despite women's clear spiritual interests and capacity, India remains solidly patriarchal and class stratified culture. Women, along with those in the untouchable class, were forbidden from participating in Brahmin upper caste rituals or from reciting the Vedic mantras. And this last sentence is a big deal. For example, the Gayatri Mantra was not to be recited by women. Well, the good news is that yoga in India has traditionally been performed only by men, but in the United States, it's mainly women. And my wife, Linda, had to memorize the Gayatri Mantra, and she chants it in her classes. So, there is progress being made. So this is something that my wife does, and I thought this was very interesting that in the United States, this is allowed and not considered taboo in any way. So I wanted to talk about Mahapajapati for a bit. After the Buddha becomes enlightened, she also wants to follow the path. Rahula is following the path. Ananda is in the path. I would like to not just be a lay follower, but I want to be a monastic. I want to be a Buddhist monastic, just like the men. So she approaches the Buddha and she asks permission for forming an order of nuns for the first time. And that Buddha turns her down 3 times. So in Indian texts, if you're turned down 3 times, that's it. That's it. So she was dejected and she returned home, but then she kicks it up a notch. Soon, and 500 just means a lot of women. It doesn't mean literally 500, but more than 2, a lot. Soon, 500 women gathered around her as they too felt the urge, either through bereavement from these wars or following the their beloved kin to seek ordination. So this is where she's very bold. She shaves her hair and she puts on the yellow robe of a monk, and her 500 followers do the same. And they march from the city to the monastery. It's a distance of about 357 miles. She covered the distance with her followers by foot, although various chieftains and lords placed chariots at their disposal. At the end of the journey, they were thoroughly exhausted and travel worn. The march caused a great stir. So I almost think of this as Martin Luther King's March on Selma. As they march, they start to attract more and more attention. It kind of becomes a big deal. And I think Ananda is telling the Buddha, they're 100 miles out and there's got to be 100 of them. And then, crowds are gathering outside the monastery gates and they're going to be here in a couple days. The march caused a great stir in the district through which they passed. Such a walk attracted attention, and soon the crowds lined the route. She felt that in the circumstances, it was not fitting that she should court a refusal by the Buddha. She didn't want to, I think, embarrass him. So she and her 500 companions lingered at the entrance of the monastery, when to their great good fortune, along comes Venerable Ananda appeared. So Ananda and Mahapajapati are both very famous in Buddhism for women's rights. Ananda always taught women, and a lot of the monks thought it was a bad idea, and there's a lot of friction. But Ananda always was eager to teach women. He was amazed to see his aunt in such a sorry state. He inquired whether any calamity had befallen the royal house of the Shakyans, or whether there was a revolt. She assured him there was nothing of the kind, but told him the purpose of their mission. Venerable Ananda was eminently fit to play the role of mediator. Again and again, Venerable Ananda entreated the Buddha, but only to be refused. And I've been reading this book, Beyond Gender by Rita Gross, and she gives Buddhism high marks in equality for all genders, but there's been an overlay of patriarchy in the institution. So when I read this, I thought she was just going to bash Buddhism really hard, but she's a very devout Buddhism, but says we could do a lot better. And so she explains, and other scholars have explained, is one of the reasons why the Buddha kept saying no was not that women weren't worthy, it was that he didn't have a monastery for them. There was no land or building for them to go and isolate themselves in a monastic institution. And, everybody's supposed to be celibate. You can't have a co-ed monastery. So the Buddha was like, I don't know what I'm to do with 500 women. I have nowhere. Where are they going to go? It was a logistical nightmare. So finally, Venerable Ananda interceded, and he finally played the trump card. He said, isn't it not possible for a woman to attain the fruit of a stream enterer, or of a once returner, or of a non-returner, or of an arhat? So these are the 4 levels of Theravadan Buddhism. There's kind of like 1st grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade. fifth grade. And so there's these different levels. And the Buddha responded by saying that, yes, a woman could attain as well as a man. And because of this, he is compelled to consent to the establishment of the order of nuns of over 500 bhikkhunis, female nuns, went into a Buddhist monastery. So I'm going to go over the last thing. Prior to Bhikkhuni Mahapajapati's death, so now she's like 100 years old, 120 years old, and profoundly spiritual people in these stories live to 120, right? So if you're, you live a long time, which is kind of weird. The Buddha only lived to 80. So that's probably historically accurate. But Ananda, Mahapajapati, they all live well past 100 because of their spiritual powers. So prior to her death, she visits the Buddha to bid goodbye and to thank him. When she rose to depart, the Buddha and his disciples followed her due to sheer respect. In the history of Buddhism, this was the first instance that the Buddha followed or walked behind another person to pay his respects. The bhikkhuni's funeral was supposed to be the biggest ceremony in India. This was the first time that the Buddha participated in a funeral. The Buddha, with his two main disciples, Sariputra and Moggallana, and Venerable Ananda, walked in the funeral procession. The bhikkhu, the monks, the nuns, and the royalty and the ministers followed. So these are the three huge things that she's known for. She was the foster mother of the Buddha. She began the female Sangha, and she realized ultimate awakening prior to her death, just like the Buddha does. So she realizes parinirvana before the Buddha, right? She dies, flowers rain down from the sky, rainbows appear, the whole 9 yards in the Indian literary tradition, showing her depth of practice. So in our adult discussion that's coming next, you'll hear ministers and media say that the reason why he allowed her to become and to begin the Buddhist monastery for women is because he owed her a big favor, because she was his mother. And the more I think about that, the more it irks me, because they never say the Buddha did a favor to Ananda, or the Buddha did a favor to Rahula, or a favor to his father Suddhodana. They only seem to say it about Mahapajapati, that it was somehow out of the obligation of a son, that he owed her this. And we're going to listen to a scholar that says, that's not the case. He owed her, but not for her motherhood. It was for her depth of understanding and insight that he was compelled. The Buddha cannot stand in the way of somebody becoming enlightened, right? That's the whole job of a bodhisattva, is to enlighten others. So if somebody comes and is devout and sincere and on the path, you have to let them in. That's the passport that you need. So she is one of the great figures, and she's known in Buddhism as the mother of Buddhism. And as I said, maybe we should do this in our tradition, but in a lot of temples across the world, they have special services to honor women in Buddhism by honoring Mahapajapati and the great Ananda. And so this is a very important part of Buddhism. So I want you to help me close in Gasho. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Naman Butsu, Naman Butsu. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sensei, for sharing that with us. And please, following in the adult discussion, don't hesitate to ask any questions, because it's a great opportunity to learn from all these teachers. So at this time, please join me in reading the pledge from Wanshu Otani, If you all received the handout as you enter, if you'd all please rise. Our pledge. Breaking out of my shell, I will share a warm smile and speak gentle words, just like the kind Buddha. Not becoming lost in my greed, anger, and ignorance, I shall think and act with an open mind, just like the calm and peaceful Buddha. Not putting myself first, I will share in the joy and sadness of others, just like the compassionate Buddha. Realizing the gift of life I have received, I shall strive to live each day to its fullest, like the Buddha who tirelessly works to liberate all. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Thank you. Please be seated. At this time, we'd like to go over announcements. So for our regularly scheduled events, we have our online mindfulness and Qing Buddhism Wednesday evenings at 7 p.m. via Zoom. Please join us for, excuse me. Please join us for meditation, chanting, listening, and reflection. Also, we encourage discussion during those sessions. On Sundays, we have the online Dharma Recovery at 12:30, also via Zoom. And so later this afternoon, that is available. We have Dharma School Connection on May 22nd at 11:15 via Zoom, and that will be following our Dharma service. And so for more information and meeting links, please contact the temple at vbt@vbtemple.org. Coming up, the BWA is having a fundraiser. It's the Panda Express on May 19th. So please save the date. We've been place your orders online using the special code, which is there on the screen, but also I can give this number out to you. It's 908-286. And so share that information with your friends. And the Buddhist Women's Association will receive a portion of those proceeds. So it's online order only, so don't go to your Panda. They won't know what you're talking about. But throughout the BCA this past year, a lot of temples have been using this method as a fundraiser, and it's been very successful. So thank you, BWA, for doing that. And so upcoming events, mark your calendars. So next Sunday, May 15th, for our Gotana service, Shinran Shonin's birthday, we have a special guest, Reverend Marvin Harada, the Bishop of BCA, is coming. So he will be here in person. And so he'll be our officiant and guest speaker. So please, register to attend. And again, as I mentioned before, please encourage your friends to do so as well. We'll make the reservation through the weekly email link, but you can also call the temple office. And we're going to have a limit of 75, so that's a little bit over twice as many people that's here today. Our Zoom links will continue to be emailed to those joining us online, so please do so. And are there any other announcements? No? Okay. And at this time, this will conclude today's service. Please join me in Gassho. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namandavs. Namandav. Namandav. Namandavs. Thank you very much. And then we will continue with the adult Dharma discussion with Reverend Jon. So thank you. And final gasho. Thank you, Sensei.
Okay, if you could, we'll open with Gasho. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namanda Butsu. Namanda Butsu. Namanda Butsu. Namanda Butsu. So, we have official special services listed in our service book, and there's about one a month. But then we also have some that aren't official, but are still very special, and I think they should be official. So Mother's Day is kind of one of those. Father's Day, I think Bodhi Day is not, it may not be in our service book. That Parinirvana Day, I don't think it's in our service book. So I kind of was thinking of this as a special service, and I had a really long talk. And then when I got the program, it said adult discussion. So I said, okay, I know what I'll do. I'll just cut it into thirds. So I did the first 2 thirds. Now we're going to do the last third. And we can ask questions and talk. There's a lot to cover, so I think it's good we took a break. This is a picture of Jan Nadia from the Indiana University, UC Berkeley. And I've been nagging Reverend Harada a lot. I keep saying, Mark Blum is at UC Berkeley, and he's a great speaker. And I'm like, Jan Nadia, I think she's right there too. Can't we get her? I don't know. I think she's a rock star. I would love to just hear her speak. She's really good. And I have a little bit of bias too, gender bias. I knew her name was, I thought it was Jan Nadir, and I assumed that Jan was a guy, right? Because it's a neutral name, gender neutral name. But my daughter's been challenging me all the time. Like, she always says, why do you assume it's a guy? Or why do you assume it's a girl? Maybe the plumber's a woman, maybe. So my daughter calls me out on this all the time. And this was a good example. So Jan, she's a famous scholar, and it's Nadia. It's a French, I think, Nadia. So I really like her a lot. I've listened to lots and lots of seminars by her, and I've read almost everything she's written. She's really excellent writer as well. Some scholars, they're really smart, but they're impossible to read. She's very interesting. She's deep, but accessible. So the first book I read from her was Once Upon a Future Time. Sometimes we talk about Mapo in our tradition, end times or the future. We're kind of in the middle of this time cycle. She covers this in here, and it was really a good book. And then she also does a book about the beginnings of Mahayana Buddhism, and it's called A Few Good Men, and it came out in 2003. And if you read this book, it's not, Mahayana Buddhism is much different than the common kind of popular understanding of Mahayana Buddhism. It's very interesting. And then researching this talk, I found she wrote a third book, and it's called The Bodhisattva Path. And I rushed to buy it, but then I realized it's just a reprint of the 2003 book. And my guess is that Tom Cruise and Jack Nicholson called her up and said, you can't use the title from our movie on your book. I have a feeling probably somebody said that's a copyrighted title of a major American film. And I have a feeling she had to republish her book under a different title. So I still have both books. I just have the original 2003. So I talked about Mahayana Buddhism. It has a giant set of texts that are newer, and it's an open canon. The Theravadan, the Pali, the earlier kind of general Buddhism has a much smaller canon, and it's closed. And I used to spell canon wrong. I think I used to spell it with C-A-N-N-O-N, but that's the thing that shoots balls. So I have trouble with grammar, and I have trouble with spelling. So one N in the middle. So the Pali Canon really isn't that big. I think this is it. It's very small. You could, I mean, this seems readable to me. There's a bookshelf just like this, a bookcase just like this at the Oxnard Temple. So, I mean, in theory, I think you could get the entire Pali Canon in English, and you could read the whole thing if you wanted to. But the Mahayana Canon, I've shown this picture before, is huge. Jan Nadier estimates that it's over 500,000 pages. So, I mean, it's like a giant room. No human being could read this, I don't think. So when you hear that like Honen read the entire canon 10 times or something, that has to be an exaggeration. I mean, if you just figure that out, 500,000 pages, and you read, 50,000, I mean, it's impossible. Even if you read 50,000 a year, I don't think you would ever make it. So what we're looking at is kind of the early Pali Canon. And in the early Pali Canon, there were 4 stages to becoming a Buddha. And it's kind of funny, how many do you think there is in the Mahayana Canon? There's 52. It's hilarious. Everything's bigger, grander, mythical. People are flying, and there's magic, there's Buddhas everywhere. It's much more artistic, much more theatrical. So I went and this is what Mahapajapati was able to achieve, and what compelled the Buddha to let her begin the Buddhist female Sangha. This kind of has Indian cosmology in it. The Buddha didn't take this, well, the way I was taught, he didn't take this literally. The way I've been taught is that multiple lives, like I kind of think of my life before Buddhism and my life after Buddhism. Or if you are a recovering addict, you might think that way. There's my life before AA and my life after AA. So that's the way I understand it. But the stream enterer is the person who dips their toe in the river of the Dharma and begins to practice. And you're not a Buddha yet, but your destination's kind of guaranteed. And then the once returner, and it has the word Turner in it. I don't know if you noticed that. That's my name right there. I'm a once returner. It says that you only have to come back as a human one more time. So that's pretty fast, right? You just got to come back once more, and then you'll be a Buddha. And then the non-returner, you don't have to come back at all, but you have to go to like a Pure Land or a Buddha Land to do like your postgraduate work before you could become a Buddha. And then the Arhat is the highest one. You've gotten rid of all your passions, and there's no more rebirth, and you're good to go. So the idea is that Mahapajapati was able to achieve this. And in a sense, she achieved it without being a monastic, right? She was a layperson that was able to achieve one of these levels, like not full-time monastic, but living as an everyday person. So that's kind of an amazing thing. So that's what Ananda bases his argument on, that your Pajapati has already realized one of these levels, and that's why she should be allowed to begin the female Sangha. It had nothing to do with her being your mom. He didn't really play that card. But that's the card we hear of most of the time. I've heard people say that the Buddha just owed her a big one, or he was really indebted to her, and he was kind of had to do it because it's my mom. Because she's my mom, I guess I'll have to let her come in. It wasn't like that. So there's a almost 50-minute seminar that Jan Nadier gave in November 14th, 2015, and it was at a Women in Buddhism symposium, and she did her entire talk in Mahapajapati. And I cut 3 minutes out of the 50 minutes, but I don't know how good it's going to sound. So what she does is somebody asks her, how does Pajapati fit into Buddhism, and how does she navigate these 3 roles as the foster mother, the originator of the female Buddhist Sangha, and realizing parinirvana? And Was she allowed into the Buddhist Sangha as a favor, like a Mother's Day gift? Or what was the reasoning behind that? And there is another story in the Pali Canon where Mahapajapati gives and donates a robe to the Buddha as her son. And he says, let's not make this a family thing. You know, the role we're playing here is not mother-son, it's teacher-student. And if you want to donate a robe, that's wonderful, but let's donate it to the Sangha. So let's make it a Buddha Dharma Sangha thing, not a family thing. So it seems quite clear from the Buddhist point of view that this wasn't a familial relationship, right? It was a student-teacher relationship. So if this sounds good, we'll listen to it.
In terms of textual analysis of the story that Ananda uses her foster mother,
Share sound.
nun's order. My read of that is that of
Okay.
textual analysis of the
So basically, she says that the reason the Buddha acquiesced is he was able to find a place for those 501 nuns to stay, and that he was obligated not in terms of mother-son, but in terms of her achievement, her realization along the Buddhist path. And so she says that the message to this story is that women can do it. Women are equal to men in every way, including spiritual attainment. And that's why he was compelled to open a monastic tradition for women. And Mahapajapati kind of becomes the analog to the Buddha because she's in a female monastic community. She becomes the spiritual head and leader of all 500 bhikkhunis. And so she plays a really, really important role in Buddhism. So she says that in the texts, they do mention that it was the Buddha's mother, but she said it's parenthetical, right? I know what that means, right? Parenthetical means is you write a sentence and then you have a little bit of information that really doesn't have a lot to do with the point, but it was interesting, and then you get back to the point. So it's parenthetical in that sense. And also they said that the writers actually used like em dashes as kind of to cut it, to push it off from the rest of the text. So she's what's called a philologist. She studies texts, she reads Sanskrit, she understands Tibetan, so she constantly is devouring texts. And she says what's difficult about it is Buddhism was an oral tradition, and this happens in Christianity too. A lot of mistakes are made. When you repeat things over and over again, you accidentally pull a paragraph in from another text, and it gets placed into the new text. And good scholars can kind of see that because the style of language is different. Just the style of the writing changes in this little paragraph that doesn't seem to have a lot to do with the rest of the story. So what they kind of do is they know which bits are alien, foreign, they're implants, they're interlopers, they're not really supposed to be there. And so it's her opinion that this really had nothing to do with a son giving his mother a favor. It had to do with his responsibility to make sure that all beings have a path to awakening. And that's why he let her in to the practice. And, he didn't just ordain her like Rahula and Ananda. He set her up as the person in charge of a female monastic tradition. So it's a huge thing. I mean, he didn't do this with anyone else, right? Because he was the one who did it for the men. She was the one who did it for the women. So that earlier picture I showed you of Mahapajapati holding the young Buddha, remember those 3 pictures? That's another thing you see on the internet. It looks Greek. It looks like an ancient Greek or Roman depiction. The artwork looks Greek. So that's a dead giveaway too, that it's not Buddhist. So I went on the internet and I found this image that's a lot closer. This is something how Mahapajapati might have looked. She's a woman of color, but she also didn't have 4 arms, right? In this book that I've been reading, no, not this book, but on the internet in a tricycle article, she wrote about the importance of truth in Buddhism and non-literal truth. She was at a museum, a Buddhist museum, and they had a statue of a Bodhisattva with multiple arms. And she heard a couple say, "Oh, that must be like somebody with a physical deformity." And she went, "Oh my gosh, it's not literal. You have to be very careful. It's not literal." Multiple arms in Buddhism means compassion, embracing all beings, caring for everyone, not making distinctions. So multiple arms mean that you can give more hugs. So this is kind of what she might have looked like. And this is an Indian, this is a piece of Indian artwork, not Western Greco-Roman artwork. So the other thing I've noticed a lot too is their names have to be Dharma names, right? When she was born and she was a little baby, her mom and dad didn't sit around and go, "I think we should call her Mahapajapati." These names are their spiritual names, right? They're homeos. They're their Dharma name, the name that is aspirational or description, a nickname. So Maha, just like in Mahayana, means great. So she's great. So that's the first part of her name, great. And then Pajapati, or Pajapati, means leader of the Sangha. So she is the great leader of the Sangha. And then Gotami or Gotama is her Buddha's family name, right? Because you have Siddhartha Gautama and you have, she's from the same family. She's part of that Shakyan group. And then we talked about it. She has plays 3 major roles in Buddhism. She's the adopted foster mother of Prince Siddhartha Gautama. She's not only the first Buddhist nun, but she begins the female Sangha, which is still, alive and well today in Mahayana Buddhism. And she realizes parinirvana at death. So this is, complete and total enlightenment as one nears moments before death. So, like I said about Mother's Day, it really is for your mother, but I was going to argue that this story is not really about Mahapajapati. It's not this apostrophe. I think it's this apostrophe, that all women, this is a story about the potentiality of all women. It's not unique. She's not special, but she opened the door to all women. So for Mother's Day, I would put the apostrophe here, but for Mahapajapati's Day, I think I would put the apostrophe there. So this is what gives equal access to Buddhism for all women because of this one person. And I don't know, I think she's great. So, her life story is huge. From the time she begins the female Sangha to the time she dies, she's ordaining women, she's teaching, she's doing begging rounds. I mean, she's living the life of a Buddha and the practice of a living Buddha. So this is the end of the last third of my talk. There's no more thirds coming. So I'm going to come off the Nijin for discussion.